there are few left alive to tell the story of the signing of the Sweet Shop's first recording contract. Guitarist Frank Torpey recalls that Brian knew a singer by the name of Paul, who was employed by Mellin's Music Company. Roger Mellin was a successful music publisher whose career dates back to the mid-50s. He had associations with the Philips Recording Company, whose offshoot label Fontana would release Sweet's first record. At Brian's suggestion, the lads went to visit Paul to see if any doors could be opened. At the time, Paul Nicholas had yet to achieve any of the huge success that would be his during the 70s and 80s. His stage and recording career would include starring roles in Lloyd Webber productions and several disco hits in the mid-70s. During the 80s, he enjoyed several years as a sitcom star in his series Just Good Friends. Back in 1967, he was simply a friend of Brian's, and a very useful one as it turned out. Following a meeting with Mr. Mellin, as he was known, the band was introduced to a young drummer and songwriter called Philip Wayman. Wayman was by all accounts keener than keen to produce the group after being blown away by their harmonic skills. During the mid-60s and 70s, a good beat and harmonies were essential if a record was to be picked up on radio. Wayman fully understood this and always went for a solid drum track and first-rate vocal harmonies. The name The Sweet is said to have come about because the band rehearsed above a sweet shop in Harlesden, North London. Legend goes that it was Mick Tucker who picked the name. However, Torpey dismisses this claim and says that the name came from the ether and was one of two choices, the other name for the band being the cheery-sounding Tears. Luckily, the four plumbed for the Sweet Shop. However, when the time arrived to sign their first publishing and recording contract, it was discovered that another group had taken the name, so the decisive Mr. Mellin scribbled out the word shop, and the Sweet was born. Brian's girlfriend, Marilyn, was forced to eat humble pie, as her faith in Brian's destined stardom was not always as strong as his. Now it actually gone and made a record. The Fontana label had seen the release of many successful singles during the 1960s, so there was much hope when the Sweet released Slow Motion in July 1968. Apart from writing and producing for themselves in later years, the early Sweet singles with Fontana and Parlophone are solid evidence to contradict those who claim that the Sweet were an invention of songwriters Nicky Chinn and Mike Chapman. They were, in fact, early pioneers to some degree, the notion of a pop group having existed for only 4 or 5 years prior to them forming the Sweet. The Beatles had begun a trend earlier that had set pop music galloping in its development. Mick and Steve, in particular, liked the music of a new group called Cream. One of Cream's more popular of 5 top 30 hits, Sunshine of Your Love, would follow Slow Motion in early 1968. Cream was truly groundbreaking in 1967, all but launching the career of the great Eric Clapton. Prior to Cream, Clapton had cut his teeth in the Yardbirds. Slow Motion saw the emergence of a new Brian Conley. His performance is excellent, as are most other aspects of the recording. A real slice of the swinging 60s, the band provided little more than backing vocals for the record, as was the custom in the days when recording sessions were the domain of session players, and pop singles were recorded live in 1 or 2 takes. As outstanding as it was, Slow Motion did not receive significant amount of airplay and failed to make the charts. In August '68, the band played 2 sessions for the BBC at the Piccadilly Theatre in London. It had been brief, but the members of Sweet had tasted some recognition, if not fame. As with all good things, they wanted more. Sadly, Fontana and Mellin's music didn't see a future for Brian and his comrades, so in October 1968 their deal ended. They continued to find work in clubs and Air Force bases till the end of the year, when, just like Mellin and Fontana, Torpey decided that there was no future to be found hanging around in the Sweet. Lollipop Man and the Paper Dolls. After a month or so adrift without a manager or a lead guitarist, the newly formed Sweet were taken under the care of Roger Easterby, who was having considerable success with the group Vanity Fair. Meanwhile, Mick had found them another guitarist, a lad named Mike Stewart. The new boy had little time to prepare himself before he was off on the Sweet bandwagon. They were growing in popularity on the gig circuit, and Easterby had secured them a recording contract. First up was probably one of the worst records ever made, and definitely the one truly horrible disc issued by Sweet. The song was written by the winning team of Hammond and Hazelwood, whose songs were apt to be at the sharp end of the bubblegum market. The song Lollipop Man was hated by all of the group. They simply had no choice in what would be their debut EMI offering. Lollipop Man deserves no more time spent on it than it takes to play. Just one play. While the nucleus of Connolly, Tucker and Priest were not enamoured with their second singles offering, the new guitarist Mick Stewart let it be known that he was not at all happy to be associated with such nonsense. However, at this point in time and for some years to come, the Sweet was in the business of making it by hook or by crook. Shortly after the stillbirth of Lollipop Man, Easterby got the band a job backing a girl group on tour. The Paper Dolls had recently scored a huge hit with a real cracker of a song, Something Here in My Heart. Sweet had to learn that hit and 5 or 6 other numbers and accompany the girls on tour. There were a few tryout shows in London, and then both groups headed for Manchester to complete a 3-week run at the La Dolce Vita nightclub. In his book, Are You Ready, Steve? Steve Priest describes the tense rehearsals with the 3 members of the Dolls. He particularly didn't like the lead singer, Tiger, who treated Sweet as hired hands and backing musicians, which is exactly what they were. The other girls were called Spider and Copper. By all accounts, the work went well once they were in Manchester. In order to qualify for his share of the wages, Brian went on stage and mimed with an unplugged electric guitar. This worked well for a while until one night he didn't realise the thing was indeed still plugged in. Tiger, Copper and Co. were singly unimpressed by the terrible racket that he had made throughout their show and insisted Brian and Sweet were fired. 2 weeks into the engagement, the band was sent packing. As 1969 progressed, the band's work began to slow up. They were still going once or twice a week, but many venues had already booked them several times. Brian was now nearly 24, just past the perfect age for pop stardom. Fortunately, his blonde hair and clean complexion seemed immune to the nights of heavy boozing he frequently indulged in. Steve was the baby of the band, just 20 years of age, followed closely by Mick Tucker, who was a year older. Mick Stewart had not gelled fully with the 3 original members of the band, but despite this they were a very happy band. Frank Torpey still kept in contact with Brian from time to time and was confident he had made the right decision in leaving his pals. After all, a few weeks with the Paper Dolls and another flop were hardly causes for celebration or recrimination.